This is a reading of The Visitor, a haunting yarn of insomnia. Copyright 2025, Mark Stephen Nordlund, all rights reserved. A Boohouse Books book. Boohousebooks.com. El Paso, Texas. Evan argued with his parents in their suburban home. The disputes had become ongoing for several months, without missing a single night. Each evening, the boy was terrified of retiring to his bedroom. He felt safe during the day, but when the sun had long passed and the hours deepened into darkness, something visited him. Something sinister. Something evil. The altercation was muffled from the blackness of his foreboding room. The childish optimism of toys, games, and cheery decor was muted by a haunting and deathly presence. Dread hung thick in the air. Abruptly, the argument ended, and a door was slammed closed. Evan sobbed as he slowly made his way down the hall. Pausing in the shaded doorway, he checked his space thoroughly before sprinting to his bed and ducking under his comforter. He laid in bed, wide awake. It would be hours before he fell asleep. Dismay reflected in his wide eyes as he stared into the darkness, fearful of any movement, any disturbance, and any sound. For roughly 10 deafening seconds, silence ensued. "Saludos, Evan." A gruff voice made him jump. He threw his blanket over his face and whimpered audibly. Evan had prayed for just one night of rest without a formidable disturbance. Tears soaked his eyes. "Don't worry, Evan. I'm not your ghost," it said. The sound of a lighter tinged and sparked. The faint light of a flame cast a shadow of a figure against a far wall. The sour odor of cigarette smoke bit the air. Evan peeked over his blanket as the flame doused. "Having trouble sleeping?" the voice asked. The intruder sounded friendly but indifferent at the same time. Its deep tone and funny accent reminded Evan of Puss in Boots. "Yes," Evan replied with a whisper. "Mom and Dad don't believe you?" the voice asked. "No," he wheezed. The visitor took a long puff on the tiny, glowing ash and exhaled. "Most parents don't." Evan sat up in his bed. His fear had subsided from the moments before. The calm voice and the comforting words it spoke was a vast improvement over what Evan typically experienced each night. It continued. "Most grown-ups are scared, so they don't believe. It protects them. But it also makes them stubborn." Another lungful of smoke, then a long exhale. "Unfortunately, stubborn parents can often make their little boy feel stupid when he sees something real." Confusion and intrigue danced in Evan's head. "Who are you?" he asked. A small dinosaur lamp clicked on in the corner of the room, illuminating the visitor. The man looked to be in his mid-30s, with days of scruff on his chin and wavy black hair. He had a dark vigilante look about him, like an outlaw cowboy or Zorro without a mask. Evan did not recognize the folding lawn chair the visitor sat in, nor the tall bottle of olive oil and plastic grocery bags at his feet. The sharp scent of basil and rosemary added to the pungent tobacco. "I'm another little boy," the man said. Cigarette pinched between his knuckles. He unwrapped a sandwich covered in plastic and took a bite. "Like you," he added with a full mouth. Evan eyed the man and then the sandwich. "Those are my dad's, for work." Zorro lifted the turkey on Swiss with ciabatta and examined it. "My mom makes them for him," Evan said. "She's good," the man praised. "Good mustard. French's Dijon?" he asked. "Store brand," Evan answered. The stranger lifted the bread and observed the item's inner ingredients. "Desplumador, hijo de puta," he remarked with a whisper. "What does that mean?" Evan squawked. The man feigned incognizance. His eyes darted innocently. "What does what mean?" "Those words you used," Evan clarified. "In another language." He took another large bite before stowing the sandwich in the inside pocket of his long brown jacket. Evan briefly noticed a necklace of small dehydrated animal bones around the man's neck as he pocketed the plastic and bread. "It means, I love sandwiches," the man fibbed. Evan rolled his eyes. The lie was visibly noticeable. "But I did not just come here for a snack." He doused his cigarette on the clean white finish of the lamp table. The man sat back in his lawn chair and straightened his coat. "I've been looking for you for a long time, Evan," he said. He cocked his head to the side. "Well, not you in particular," he clarified. "Your friend." Evan's confusion grew. "You have a ghost," the man growled. Evan nodded. His fear returned as he thought on his blight. His fingers tapped the bedsheets as he frittered. "When does it come?" the visitor asked. Evan frowned. "Every night, when it's dark and my mom and dad go to bed." "Where does it come from?" the man asked. Raising his little arm, Evan pointed hesitantly toward a large hanging quilt on the wall opposite his bed. The unsightly 19th century bedspread was decoratively displayed, taking up a good 6 by 5 feet of vertical space. "From my mom's blanket. It's haunted," Evan whimpered. The visitor beheld the tapestry. "It's ugly," he quickly offhanded. His seat creaked as he stood and neared the quilt. Evan grew nervous. "Does the ghost talk to you?" he questioned. "Yes," Evan answered. "Do you talk back to it?" he asked. The child shivered with dismay. "No, I can't understand what it's saying." "Good boy," the man said. "Your friend only speaks Spanish. It needs to know that you can see it before it acts. If you had spoken back in any language, it would have taken you with it." "Taken me where?" Evan inquired with a tinge of panic. Ignoring the question, the man placed his open hand gently at the center of the decoration. "It comes from here?" Evan nodded again. The man took the edges of the quilt into his fingers. "Don't touch it," Evan whispered loudly, throwing out his hand. An assuring finger was brought to the man's lips. "Don't worry, Evan. I'm a professional." He showboated with dramatic hand movements like a street magician to play to the boy's naivete. He slowly felt the fabric, rubbed its worn texture with his palm, and sniffed it thoroughly as Evan watched with intrigue. He released the tapestry and dropped his hands to his sides. He turned to Evan. "This blanket is not haunted," he concluded. "I think you may be mistaken." Evan became frustrated. "It is haunted. The ghost comes out of there every night. It's old, really old. My mom's grandma gave it to her, and her grandma gave it to—" As Evan spoke, the visitor whirled around and tore the quilt from the wall, exposing a splatter of black ectoplasm, infecting the drywall with a frightening and transcendental energy. Evan's eyes went wide with shock. The man examined the blemish as he carelessly gathered the quilt and tossed it aside. An expression of awestruck familiarity and cynical joy shined in the man's stare as he looked upon the heinous portal. He lifted his hand and felt its current as the substance oozed and breathed. "Por fin te encontré, hijo de puta," he whispered with a grin. "This is where your friend is coming from, Evan." Taking a step back, he returned to his squeaky chair and made himself comfortable. Evan's gaze snapped back and forth between the seated stranger and the black, searing mass. "What happens now?" he asked fearfully. The visitor reached into one of his grocery bags and pulled out a tall glass bottle of Mexican Coke. He twisted off the top and took a swig. He tilted the bottle, pointing it in Evan's direction. "This time, don't cover your face with your blanket when your ghost approaches you," he instructed. Evan winced. "It's still coming?" "You said it comes every night," the man spat. The boy's expression went deadpan. "Now lay on your pillow and make believe I'm not even here," he ordered. Evan just stared at him. He didn't know what he had expected the man to do about his supernatural problem, but he was hoping for more than this. "Betty bye time, Evan," the intruder encouraged. "Go to sleep. Ve a dormir. Arroro mi niño," he sang. Evan didn't appreciate the condescension. but he had no other options. Telling his parents about the visitor would result in him facing the ghost by himself again. He slowly leaned back and laid his head flat against his pillow. He pulled the blanket up under his chin. "Are you going to kill it?" Evan asked. "Nobody can kill a ghost," the man growled softly. "And if I did kill it, it would be of little use to me." Evan heard the Coke bottle tip back, followed by a hard swallow. "When the ghost speaks to you tonight, answer," he whispered. "But won't it try to take me away?" Evan shrieked. The dinosaur lamp was clicked off and the entire room went black. The child stared fearfully into the dark void of the ceiling. "Oh, Evan," the voice said, "that is exactly what I am counting on." El Ruby, Mexico. 25 years prior, Julio laid in bed and stared at the black ceiling. He was 8 years old. His bedroom was dirty, sweltering, and meager. Nothing decorated the walls, and all of his belongings were packed in wooden crates and boxes in the center of a dingy oval rug. Beside his head, a small Bible, a rosary, and an antique Zippo rested on a tilted stool. Terror rushed through his veins as he shivered under his thin, orange blanket. He turned his head and glanced quickly at a large, black stain that had formed on his wall below the ceiling. The blemish was dark like tar, and streams from the stigma seemed to drip downward without movement. Julio snapped his gaze back to the ceiling and continued to tremble. He waited, for hours, just as sleep began to take hold and heavy eyelids became impossible to restrain. It appeared. In the corner of his eye, Julio saw a dark shape move from the direction of the stain like a shadow gliding smoothly across the wall. His body's warrant for sleep vanished, and the terror returned in full vigor. He made every mental attempt to keep his eyes on the ceiling, but pure impulse forced him to turn his head and point his sights directly in the movement's direction. From the stain, an apparition emerged. A twisting, nightmarish figure with long, slim arms and a gnarled face floated through the blistered wall with two nefarious, dead eyes fixated on Julio's fearful gaze. The legless entity drifted silently like a dying birthday balloon across the room and toward his pillow. Julio looked away as beads of sweat dripped from his forehead and into his eyes. The sweat burned like soap, but he did not dare move or react. The ghost brought its ghastly face just centimeters from the boy's cheek and halted its movement. It hovered above the stack of boxes as ebony vapor emitted from its body like smoke from a doused candle. Julio choked back whimpers and moans as he cried in the back of his throat. After what felt like hours, the beast spoke. "Mi ves?" The creature hissed. Its voice sounded like a corpse brought back to living after centuries of torment in the furnace. Julio did not speak. He did not dare. He had never spoken to it. Not a gasp, not a squeak, not a word. The corpse spoke again. "Mi ves?" This time the question was more aggressive. Fluid poured from Julio's nose and over his mouth. His hands and feet were ice cold in the heat of the sweltering room. The entity began to quiver. The sound of snapping bone and tearing flesh could be heard clearly as the ghost turned its rotting head and placed its deathly mouth against Julio's right eye. "Mavis!" The monster screamed horrifically with one frozen and hollow breath. The hellish voice shook the room and crashed against the boy's eardrum as he struggled to remain silent. Julio's flesh crawled and his entire body ached. Grueling minutes passed as the apparition remained. Suddenly the ghost huffed, lifted its dangling arms and departed from the bed. With one swift movement, it vanished back into the stain and through the wall, returning to the infierno from which it only could have come. Julio quickly sat up, gasping and heaving. He grabbed for the Zippo, flipped the top open and lit a flame. Weak light shined upon the mark of death on his wall. The ghost was gone. He took a breath of relief, confident it would not return, at least not tonight. It had come through the stain every night since he could remember, and on truly terrible nights, it would speak to him, or worse. But not anymore. Shaking out the flame, he dried his face with his blanket and held the silver lighter in the faint reflection of night light. The words, "La valentía se encuentra en el miedo y la oscuridad," were etched into its side. He gave the stain a final look in the dark. "Me deshique de ti para siempre," he whispered. He would never have to see the demon again, he thought. Not tomorrow, not ever. He was rid of it for good. He smiled as he dwelled on the following morning. Tomorrow, Mama was moving him to California, where they would both live with her new husband and Julio's new stepfather. He would finally be rid of the ghost that came out of the wall, and after tonight, would never have to go to bed in paralyzing and gut-twisting terror again. In the weeks that passed, Julio and his mom had moved to Santa Monica, into the new 2-bedroom apartment Nicolas had rented for them. Nicolas was a kind papa. He was friendly, patient, and Julio could tell that he loved Mama very much. By association, Julio as well. Nicolas never lost his temper. He made time for his family and always included Julio when making plans. However, Nicolas did have a tendency to curse. A lot. Over a short several weeks, Julio learned an impressive and abundant vocabulary of new words, in Spanish and in English. The new family lived on the 4th floor of a shiny apartment building with a tall security fence. Their windows looked out onto a community playground, a flea market, and a bank advertising, cash loans with no credit. Julio's room was massive and full of toys, 70 carpeted square feet of matchbox trucks, stuffed animals, video game posters, a beanbag chair, and a bed in the shape of a race car. He had clean, running water, dependable electricity, and a baño you didn't have to hold your breath to use. Compared to the shack he was used to in Mexico, Julio's new home was a palace. California was truly a blessing. More so was his mother's online encounter with Nicolas and his devotion and love for them both. Julio already spoke English. His mother made sure he grew up knowing both languages, and all of the channels he had watched on TV were beamed directly from the USA. Now, he had an even bigger TV and 17 more channels to watch. Every evening he would enjoy 2 reruns of The Rifleman, along with 1 episode of Batman starring Adam West, nestled snugly between Mama and Nicolas on their big sofa. Julio preferred heroic dramas to sitcoms. He felt inspired by masked avengers performing selfless deeds to bring justice and protect those who could not protect themselves. One night, Julio woke to shouting behind his bedroom wall. Out of impulse, his nervousness peaked. The shout came again. The disturbance must have been from a different apartment. His room was right between a separate unit and the edge of the building. Julio wasn't accustomed to this type of disturbance. He had never shared a wall with strangers. A third shout resonated, followed by the sound of a door slamming and a child crying. An older child. Julio jumped out of bed and turned on his light. To be absolutely sure, he checked his walls. No stain, no black, no ghost. He crawled back into bed and reassembled his thoughts. As Julio laid in his warm bed and allowed tiredness to overtake him, he could still hear the boy behind the wall sobbing softly and lonesome, well into the night. The next day, Julio made his daily visit to the park in the main courtyard. The sky was blue, and the sun was shining. A cool breeze blew through the richly lit palm trees and desert lilies. A bustle of children played on the equipment, crowding the slide, swings, and merry-go-round. He noticed a boy sitting on a bench alone. He looked about Julio's age with red hair and freckles. He seemed lonely, even sad. Instead of joining the other children, Julio approached the boy and sat beside him. "Hi," Julio greeted, making his best attempt to sound like a true native Californian. Although he may have added a bit too much of a drawl thanks to the abundance of Andy Griffith Show episodes he grew up with. The boy sighed in response. "Hi." Awkward silence passed. Julio struggled to find words. "I just moved here with my mom. We're from Mexico," he blurted out. "It's nice here." The red-headed boy sat quietly. His fingers were laced together in his lap and his head hung woefully. He didn't speak. "How old are you?" Julio asked. 7, the boy said. More silence. "I'm 8, Julio replied happily. The dead air began to thicken. There had to be something he could say to begin an engaging conversation. Julio searched his thoughts for anything that might interest an American second grader who had everything. He quickly conjured the most captivating motion he could come up with. "I know a lot of curse words in Spanish," he said gleefully. "If you'd like to learn any," he added. The child turned his head and gave Julio an odd smile. The sudden turn in the conversation drew a wide grin across the kid's face. His green eyes reflected the sunlight as he giggled. "Really?" he asked, amused. "Sí," Julio replied. His ability to speak Spanish felt like a superpower in the company of his new, unofficial friend. "I know a lot of English ones if you'd like to know those." The new companion attempted to return the offer. Julio's expression calmed with earnestness. "I'm pretty sure I know most of those too," he stated confidently. "Oh," the boy said. "What's your name?" Julio asked. He felt that introductions would be appropriate since the ice was formally broken. "Cody," he replied. "What's yours?" "Julio Becerra." The boys struck an awkward handshake and smiled. Their adolescent attempt at imitating an adult greeting was unrefined, but their delight in making the association official was genuine. Their eyes smiled as they sat side by side, watching the other children play. "Do you know the S word?" Cody asked. "In Spanish, I mean." "Yeah," Julio answered. He began to proudly answer, then stopped himself. Introducing his newfound friend to such a dark vocabulary he would most likely use seemed wrong somehow. Julio looked closely at the other children playing. Their dark hair and brown eyes matched his own, and most of the street signage, shop windows and advertisements surrounding the complex were Spanish only, or came with Spanish translations. He didn't want Cody to end up in trouble if he decided to begin tossing words around such a robust Latino audience. Julio quickly came up with a replacement word. "Columpios," he said quickly, giving his friend the Spanish word for swing set instead of the bona fide swear. "Columpios," Cody repeated with a smirk. "Columpios head," he shouted, adding a noun. "What about the D word?" Cody asked. Julio didn't bother asking which D-word curse he meant. "El tobogán," he replied. Cody laughed. "The F word?" he inquired. "Carousel," Julio lied. The green-eyed boy roared loudly with glee as if given the ability to magically set fire to anyone who wronged him. He pointed his short finger toward the children playing. "Next time someone pushes me down by the sandbox, I'm going to call them a fat, stupid columpios, el tobogán carousel," he screeched madly. Julio's head jerked. "Who pushed you by the sandbox?" he asked curiously. Cody's expression went flat. "Nobody," he said quickly. It was an obvious lie. "But if they did, I could call them that. Right to their face." The boy pointed across the park and to a tall, roguish-looking kid in a white shirt. "Especially him. He looks like he'd do something like that," Cody snapped. Julio played along with the ruse. "Well, if he ever does do anything like that, there are 2 of us now and we can stand up to him," he said. Cody smiled warmly. "Okay." His eyes gleamed. "Okay," Julio repeated with a friendly nod. The boys took a shine to one another as the day passed, and a bond began to form. Cody was the first friend Julio had made since the move, and the engagement was pleasing. They played together all day as their individual experiences, likes and cultures mingled and built a promising start to a fruitful friendship. The sun lapsed over the complex as Julio and Cody walked and talked, making laps around the building. "What curse do you use when you stub your toe? Like really hard, on the coffee table?" Cody asked. "Ardilla Verde," Julio lied. Smash your thumb with a hammer? Cody squeaked. The questions just kept coming.
Pesticida de malvavisco,
Julio droned. He was getting tired of his friend's obsession with profanity. His new superpower had gone from a blessing to a curse in a matter of half a day, and coming up with fake swears like green chipmunk and marshmallow pesticide was getting exhausting. What's a bad word you can use for anything? Like all the time, no matter what happens. For good stuff and bad stuff? Cody inquired. Okay, but this is the last one, Julio said firmly. His aggravation was apparent in his tone. Oh, Cody whispered apprehensively. He seemed disappointed, even upset. Julio immediately regretted his outlash. He decided to over-glorify his next and final curse word. It's a really good one, he emphasized. Probably the best Spanish swear ever. Cody's face lit up. Really? What is it? If I tell you, you have to promise to use it responsibly, Julio warned. Okay, Cody was elated. Tell me, he begged. Julio stopped walking and let the tension build. He cleared his throat and spoke quietly. Desplumador, he said clearly. Wow, Cody gasped in awe. Desplumador, he repeated with the best tongue he could manage. He said the word again. Desplumador. Julio gave Cody a commendatory slap on the back. Use it for good and not evil, he stated. That's important. That word gives you power. I will, Cody smiled proudly. The boys continued their walk. What does it mean? Cody asked. What does what mean? Julio deflected the question. His eyes darted innocently. Desplumador. It's a bad word, but what does it mean in Spanish? He asked. Julio hesitated. Cody hadn't asked for translations to his other words, and continuing to lie felt impudent if Julio wanted this friendship to continue. It means plucker, he said. Like duck plucker or chicken plucker. Oh, Cody replied. He looked puzzled. And that's bad? He questioned. Yeah. Julio wasn't technically lying. He hadn't known anyone whose wildest dream was to pluck ducks. It was a chore, and chores were never enjoyed. He elaborated. In Mexico, everyone hates plucking. It's the most hated job there is. That was more of a lie, but still retained somewhat of a gray area. In Tijuana prisons, they make killers pluck ducks. The killers hate plucking ducks so much they hate it more than being in prison, so it keeps them from killing and plucking ducks, he said. That was definitely a lie. Wow, Cody shouted. So plucker means you're a killer? Sure, Julio said confidently. I like that one. I like that one a lot. It's not hard to say. It sounds cool and I like what it means. I think it might be my favorite Spanish curse word. Cody nodded. Yeah? Julio squawked. Yeah, Cody confirmed. And I also like it because plucker rhymes with Cody! He was interrupted by an angry woman standing just outside the apartment entryway, shouting to him. Cody jerked his head back to view her as discontent melted over his expression. Julio noticed the woman as well. Desplumador, Cody cursed under his breath. I have to go, he sighed. He hurried away and towards the building's entrance. See you tomorrow? Julio called out. Cody turned and ran backwards. Yeah, I'll meet you on the bench. You can teach me more Spanish words. Regular ones. Julio laughed. Okay. His red-headed friend departed and neared the woman as she threw her arms into the air and reprimanded Cody for some sort of inaudible disarrangement. They disappeared through the silver and glass doors and through the male vestibule. The children shouted happily from the playground equipment as Julio smiled to himself. He had made his first friend in this new home, and Cody seemed genuinely interested in him. However, he did feel guilty about the lies. He didn't know how Cody would feel if another Spanish kid told him that toboggan meant slide and carousel meant merry-go-round, and that the words Julio had given him were basically verbal placebos. He decided not to worry. If Cody was truly destined to be his friend, it would all work out. Besides, he only lied to protect him from getting into trouble. Julio's lies were used for good, and not evil. Pounding echoes reverberated from the stairwell as Julio ran to the 4th floor. The out-of-service elevator made navigating the building a nuisance for adults, but not for little boys. He ascended the flights like a monkey up a tree without breaking a sweat. Julio made his way to Unit 148 and found the door slightly ajar. Mama and Nicholas always left it open, just a crack when he was away.
Odio este programa de televisión. ¿Por qué me haces ver esto?
Nicholas shouted from the sofa. He was complaining about something on TV. He held an orange Fanta, and his large body was wedged firmly between the cushions. Julio ran up to him, snatched the drink out of his hand, and took a long sip.
Not so much, Julio. I only have 2 left after this, the man shouted. We need to go shopping.
Mom was in the kitchen packing a plastic container of polverones she had just baked.
I like that show. They have good recipes.
She responded to her husband's previous gripe. Julio returned the bottle to Nick's hand. He took a swig.
Bah!
He immediately dismissed her answer, lifted the remote, and changed the station.
Watch that garbage on your own time, he murmured.
Mama, I made a friend today, Julio announced.
On the playground.
Her face lit up with glee upon hearing the news.
A girl?
Nick asked.
Is she cute?
He raised his eyebrows in jest.
No, I met.
Julio answered the first question, but was cut off before answering the second.
She's not cute?
Nicholas teased.
That's okay, Papito,
his mom interjected.
As long as she can cook, you'll be happy. Ooh, Julio se va a casar.
She sang loudly.
I'm not getting married, Julio shouted angrily. I met a boyfriend. You have a boyfriend?
Nick opened his mouth widely and cackled wildly. Julio's patience ran dry. He yanked the Fanta bottle from Nick's hand, ran into the kitchen and rested it on the counter.
Hey, that's mine,
Nicholas shouted. Julio folded his arms contemptuously and shot his stepfather a look of ire, refusing to budge. He knew that it would take an act of God to get Nick off the couch and onto his feet. If a hypothetical fire occurred in one of the rear bedrooms, Nicholas would most likely remain seated until the inferno reached the living room or the fridge. The man stayed wedged. A large red frown was plastered across his face. Julio turned to his mom.
My friend's name is Cody.
He has red hair and he lives in our building, he continued without interruption.
Wonderful,
she cheered.
Maybe he can come over for dinner with his family. I'll make my dulce de leche.
She glanced toward her husband.
Wouldn't that be nice, Nick?
Nicholas remained silent. He pouted, eyes glued to the TV.
I can ask him tomorrow,
Julio said excitedly.
We're meeting on the playground bench.
Very nice. I'm glad you are making friends, Papito. You're a good boy, she praised. Good boys make good friends. Mama handed him a pink cookie from the batch. He happily took the treat and ran through the living room and down the hall.
Please clean your room. It's been a mess all week, she squawked.
Nicholas irritably eyed Julio as he disappeared.
Hey! My drink! Julio!
He called desperately. No response came as seconds passed. Nick turned his attention to his wife. Elena, bring me my drink, he ordered. She snapped the lid closed on the cookies and dropped them onto the counter. Raising an eyebrow, she brazenly rested her fist on her hip and shot her husband a harsh glare. I'll bring it to you when you put my show back on, she stated. Nick threw his head back and slapped the cushion beside him with a large, aggravated hand.
Ah, hijo de puta!
He roared. Julio entered his room and threw on the lights. He took a bite of his cookie and rested it on a stack of books. Taking a second to observe his space, he quickly agreed with his mother. His room truly was a mess. If he was going to have Cody over, he'd have to make it somewhat presentable. After a long sigh, Julio hugged a pile of dirty clothes and pulled them off the bed, dropping them into the hallway.
Mom, clothes!
He screamed. Throwing his dirties into the linoleum hall was the extent of Julio's laundry skills. Mom took care of the rest. He began to tidy up, tossing cars into baskets, placing his books on a shelf, and painstakingly making his disheveled car bed. As Julio worked, something strange caught his eye. He rose from the floor and took a step closer to his wall. Realization, doubt, fear, then panic struck rapidly and, in that order, as he stared. His heart rose into his throat. His skin went cold and his legs began to shake. On the sandy beige drywall and between two colorful posters, a small black smudge was faded but prominent. It was about the size of a lime and starred outward like a spider web. Hastily, Julio ripped down the posters. The rest of the wall was clean. He stepped backward and stared at the smudge as goosebumps danced across his flesh. Julio felt the beginning of a cry at the back of his throat. His mind raced, searching for any excuse for the mark's presence, other than what he feared the very most. Mama approached from the kitchen holding a laundry basket. She began tossing undersized shirts and underwear into the receptacle as she began to speak. "Papito, is this all of your socks? I keep finding them all over the house." She caught sight of the mark on the wall, stood upright, and dropped the basket to the floor. Julio slowly looked away from the smudge. His tear-covered eyes fell desperately into his mom's mortified stare. "Mama?" He choked. A tear rolled down his cheek. Chaos struck the small home as Julio was dragged into the kitchen and subjected to a series of miniature rituals performed by his mother. "El diablo ha regresado! El diablo ha regresado!" She repeated the same panicked phrase again and again as Julio stood before her. Nicholas was wrought with confusion as his questions went unanswered. "What's wrong? What happened?" he asked. Then he asked again, with an amplified vigor. 2 eggs were removed from the fridge along with chicken stock and a prayer candle from a bookshelf in the living room. Julio's mom chanted as she pulled a rosary from a junk drawer and placed it around her son's neck. "Someone tell me what happened," Nick demanded. "Lo que está sucediendo?" Mom was busy touching each egg separately to Julio's forehead and repeating her phrase. "There's a stain on my wall," Julio sobbed. "The ghost comes out of there at night." He wept. Nick gave his famous, dismissive, "Bah!" He waved a careless hand at them and headed down the hall. Mom lit the candle and motioned it in the pattern of a cross in front of Julio's face. Her chants continued. "It's just a stain!" Nick thundered from the bedroom. "Magic eraser will take that right off. Or I can sand it off and repaint it," he suggested. "No!" Mama shrieked. "Don't touch it!" Nicholas didn't reply. She looked into her son's eyes. "You sleep in our room tonight, okay?" Julio nodded and wiped his face. The relief of not having to sleep in his room helped him calm down. His sobbing became sniffling. A sound of running water echoed down the hallway from the bathroom. "No! No! No!" Mom cried out. She stormed down the hall and began shouting at her husband. An all-out war took place as Spanish words of all kinds were hurled, tossed, and heaved. Julio was sure the entire building could hear the boisterous quarrel. Julio nonchalantly looked over his mother's familiar set of anti-demon ingredients as his parents fought. In Mexico, Mama would perform this sacrament every day, and sometimes twice after exceptionally bad nights with the ghost. She was very adamant about it. Latina moms always seemed to have a holistic cure, defense, remedy, and enrichment for just about everything. And they appeared to be experts in all of them. Most mothers and grandmothers Julio knew were devout Catholics, but some of their methods seemed a bit eerie, bordering on what some would call witchcraft. Perceivably, it was hard to tell the difference between a witch casting a spell and an average madre after the devil himself materialized in her living room. When Julio was 5, he overheard a woman at a market tell his mom that poultry kept evil spirits at bay. Herbs and oils would bind you to a spirit, and shellfish could restore a husband's enthusiasm. He had no idea what that third remedy was about, but he understood the stuff regarding spirits. In his home, it was always just poultry. Julio was invariably patient when Mom pulled out her paranormal toolbox. He had never objected or raised a fuss about it for her sake. He was sure it did nothing tangible on a magical level, but the spells seemed to make her feel better and not completely helpless. When Julio really thought about it, technically they had worked. The creature hadn't harmed him yet. That thought gave him a modicum of comfort. The hallway war ended, or at least took a hiatus. Mom retrieved a few crucial items from Julio's room and closed the door. She returned to the kitchen as Nicholas dragged his feet to the sofa and sat with a heavy huff. "You are going to stay in the living room with us. Then you are sleeping in our bed," she said kindly. Julio gave a visible acknowledgement. His eyes were red and puffy.
"Estúpido,"
Nick grumbled.
"¿Qué dijiste?"
His wife screeched. Nicholas said nothing. If the war began a second time, he would lose a second time. That night, Julio stayed on the sofa between both of his parents as they watched TV. On a typical night, he would be playing in his room or reading a book. Not tonight. Around 9, the television was turned off and Julio followed the couple into their bedroom. Just like the sofa, he was snugly pressed between them both. He stared at the ceiling as they fell asleep, imagining what kind of horrors were taking place in his room. The thought made him sick, so he pushed it out of his mind. Just as Julio closed his eyes, he heard a bang. He would have been more fearful if he hadn't recognized it. The sound came from the next unit. Just like the night before, loud, muffled shouting went on for almost a minute, followed by crying. Julio laid awake as the crying slowly faded, once again, into the hours of the night. The next morning he woke to the shake of the mattress as Nicholas got out of bed. It was still dark as the man showered, dressed, and left for work. Slumber did not return as Julio watched the ceiling become brighter as dawn came and the sun rose. Mama could sleep until noon on most days. Julio didn't have the patience to lay beside her all day. His bare feet met the warm, carpeted floor, then the cold linoleum of the hall. The TV called out to him feverishly from the living room, but the dark, alluring presence of his closed bedroom door called his name even louder. He eyed the door and the items placed below it. As a precaution, Mom had lined the foot of the door with more ingredients. Bowls of eggs and chicken stuffs were placed neatly and meticulously across the rug. Another useless gesture. Just a peek, Julio thought. He just had to see if there was anything to see. Perhaps if everything in his bedroom looked the same, he would be able to assume the smudge was just a smudge and he and his mother had overreacted. The more he thought about it, the more probable that thought became. Julio tiptoed to the door, turned the knob and peeked inside. The dreaded stain was now the size of a monster truck tire. The black tar spread outward as if attempting to swallow his entire room. A sickening, palpable weight filled the room and poured into the hall from the partially open door. Even the sunlight coming through the window seemed cursed and diseased. Overwrought with hysteria, Julio slammed the door shut. His panicked feet slapped the floor, all the way to the living room. A dreary overcast loomed over the playground. No children played on the lonesome equipment, and the saturated colors that had shone so brightly from the day before were now faded with a shade of somber gray. Cody sat on the bench, hanging his head and staring at the ground. His visage and posture matched the deposition of the cloudy day like a dispiriting oil painting. Julio sat beside him. "Hi." Julio's voice cracked. Cody looked up and smiled, but the expression lied. "Hi," he squeaked. He dropped his head back into its previous position. The boy swung his feet to convey sanctity, but his shoes lied as well. Julio began placing pieces of a puzzle together in his head. Cody's sad expression both days, and the crying through his bedroom wall both nights, seemed too coincidental to be unrelated. Julio wanted confirmation, but had to obtain it in a way that didn't embarrass his new friend. "What floor do you live on?" he casually asked. 4, Cody mumbled. Julio lifted his head and nodded to himself. He got his confirmation. I live on the end of that floor, 148, he said happily. Cody smiled again. This time the sparkle in his eye was genuine. I live in 146. We're neighbors, he giggled. Cool. I'll bet our rooms are right next to each other, Julio exclaimed with feigned surprise. He began to imagine what Cody's room looked like, what kind of toys he had, and if it was a mess like his own. His thoughts darkened as he remembered the growing stain that cursed his wall. Julio began. Did you hear anything through your wall last night? Like voices or anything? He asked. His curiosity went wild, wondering if the ghost had officially returned. Oh yeah, Cody said immediately. Dread gripped Julio's throat. You did? His flesh crawled. I heard a lot of yelling, Cody explained. Yelling in Spanish, for a long time, during dinner. They were really loud. Desplumador. He cursed. The grip on Julio loosened, then dissipated immediately. Oh, he gasped. That was just Nicholas and my mom. They had a fight. Nicholas is my stepdad. Sometimes they do that. They're loud, Cody said. Yep, Julio nodded. Did they say swears? Cody asked. Yep, Julio nodded again. Just Nicholas, not my mom, Cody chuckled. His green eyes shined. What are your parents like? Julio innocently asked. Perhaps Cody would open up about his own troubles with a series of innocuous questions. Nothing that gave away prior knowledge. Cody dropped his head. His colorful expression evaporated. Julio felt a sting of regret as the dead air returned in full force. He showed patience, giving Cody ample time to think, process, and possibly answer. After a long, silent minute, the boy spoke. My dad died when I was 2, he said. I live with my mom. Oh, Julio whispered. My dad left when I was little. For a long time, I lived with my mom, too. He attempted to relate, but Julio could tell that Cody's mind was occupied. She gets really mad, Cody continued. He choked. Sometimes she hits me, he whispered sadly. His eyes welled up. His voice shook. I don't even know what I did wrong. Cody's voice went from a mumble to a frenzied shout in just one sentence. Julio jumped in his seat, and Cody began to bawl. The red-headed boy's shoulders bounced as he struggled to manage his breaths, moans and cries all at once with little success. He rubbed his fists against his eyes. She calls me. He took 3 rapid inhales. She calls me her little shit stain. Julio winced. He felt an overwhelming sadness and empathy for his best friend of 2 days and wanted very badly to take his pain away. Cody continued. And she calls me that in front of people. His cries became roars as the tension slowly drained from his little body. It was obvious he had never shared what he was sharing now, with anyone. Julio placed a sympathetic hand on Cody's shoulder for long minutes as the pressure was slowly released, and the boy could finally come to rest. Moments later, the crying stopped, and his shoulders eased. They sat side by side, silent and kindred. A new bond formed between them. Julio waited for the air to completely clear before speaking. He removed his hand and wrapped his arm around his friend. Shit stain is mancha de mierda in Spanish, he stated casually. This time, no placebo was used. That was the honest-to-God translation. Cody laughed through snot and tears, wiping his sleeve against his face. The boys shared a sideways hug as Cody gladly replaced crying with giggling. I still like Desplumador better, Cody murmured happily. Good, Julio replied. The rest of the day went on with both boys laughing, joking, and playing, despite the ominous atmosphere and the blight of their personal affairs. They were free to play on the equipment undisturbed, with no kids to stand up to, and no explosive interruptions by Cody's mother. Every several minutes or so, Julio would remember the state of his room and feel a sinking dismay that soured his stomach. He wanted so desperately to share his own affliction with Cody, but kept his lips sealed. He didn't want to seem crazy, drive his friend away, or even worse, frighten him. Cody had enough trouble getting sleep already. The stain and the ghost was Julio's problem. At dusk, Julio pushed his front door open and found Nicholas and Mama in their usual places. His mother noticed him first. "Papito, did you have fun with your friend?" she asked as graciously as she could. Her expression was still hazed by the curse on their home. "Yeah," he replied. Fear still resided in Julio as well. "Did you enjoy your date with your boyfriend?" Nick jested loudly. He, however, was completely impervious to the crisis. "When is he coming over for dinner?" Mom asked. "Oh," Julio realized he hadn't remembered to bring it up. "I'll ask him tomorrow. I forgot." "That's okay," she hummed. "Now is likely not the best time to have anyone here," she cautioned. Nick shifted his heavy body from side to side, searching under his rear and between the thick cushions of the sofa. "Where's the damn remote?" he barked. "Elena, lo tomaste?" "I didn't take it," his wife sassed. Nicholas began muttering gnarled curses as his hands moved with an increased vigor as he searched. "Did you take it into the bathroom again?" she asked. With a heaving grunt, Nick stood, faced the couch and scanned his space. "¿A dónde se fue la stupidez?" he spat furiously. Mama opened the fridge and pulled out a selection of plastic bags and piled them onto the counter. She turned and motioned for Julio to approach. "Ven aquí," she ordered. Julio rolled his eyes and shuffled over to the tile. For the 1,000th time, Mama began another sacrament. This time, with fresh chicken feet, hen's blood, and pungent livers. Julio was blessed in his scuffed jeans and dirty t-shirt. He did his best to disguise impatience with indebted gratitude. Nicholas wandered the entire apartment, looking for his coveted remote control. A minute later, he returned from the hall empty-handed. As he turned to search the sofa again, Julio spotted the controller stuck in the waistband of the man's sweatpants. Julio laughed. "Está en tus pantalones!" He continued to giggle as his stepdad felt his hips and back, eventually finding it. Nick opened his mouth wide and chuckled uproariously. The floor shook as he embedded his body back into place and surfed through channels. "Tomorrow I'm going to talk to the landlord about the leak in the bedroom. It's got to be plumbing or sewage. Something," Nicholas announced. Julio's mom became irate. "It is not plumbing or sewage. It is that thing that comes for Julio, the same thing that came for him in Mexico. You are not calling anyone." Nick muttered more curses. "What are we supposed to do? Keep him in our room forever?" he exclaimed. Mama snapped. She stormed over to the sofa and ground the man into dog meat with Latin rage. He sat quietly, staring at the floor with a deadpan expression of regret and timid submission. The woman finished her rant and returned to the kitchen, placing away her bags. "So what? We get Julio a doghouse?" he joked. Julio's brow furrowed. "Maybe he can go live with his boyfriend." Cackling laughter erupted from his giant mouth as he continued clicking the remote at the TV. Julio's mom took his face into her loving hands as Nick snickered. She kissed him on the forehead. "We are going to protect you, Papito. We will figure something out." Her words were comforting, but Julio didn't appreciate his stepfather's ignorance or ridicule. The man's ridiculous laughter upon hearing his own jokes was annoying enough. When the joke was on Julio, it became infuriating. Nick snapped his fingers. "Julio, bring me one of my drinks," he ordered. "You were just up. You should have got one then," Mom snipped. Julio just glared at him. Nick noticed the animosity. "Come on, I was kidding. Tráeme una bebida." He coughed. A wide grin stretched across Julio's lips. He waltzed casually over to the fridge, retrieved the last remaining Fanta, stood in plain view of his stepfather, and held it outward with a playful taunt. "Thank you, Chavo. Give it here," he requested. Julio unscrewed the cap, tilted back the bottle, and drank the entire 20 ounces of orange fizz as Nicholas went mad with petulance. "No, stop! Deja de beber eso! Es mi último!" he screamed. Mama smiled to herself as her husband roasted. "Elena, did you buy more when you went out?" he asked desperately. His wife shrugged. She shook her head. "I didn't buy you more Fantas. You refused to go to the store with me," she shot. Nicholas screamed with a childish rage like a baby whose chupon fell out of its mouth and into a storm drain. Mama snorted like a pig as explosive laughter forced its way through her dread, through her worry, and made her squeal with delight. It had been the first time Julio had seen her smile all day. It was Julio's second night as a human sandwich. Warm but crushed, he adjusted his posture between them to find comfort. Every now and again, he listened out for Cody or his mother through the wall. Silent tonight. Good, Julio thought. Cody can finally get one peaceful night's rest. He buried his face into his pillow and wrapped his body in the 10 inches of blanket he was allotted. Just as he found the perfect level of comfort, he felt a familiar, warm sting in his lower gut. It figured. The urge to pee always came at precisely the most imperfect and inconvenient moment. The soda was a mistake. Julio dropped his bare feet onto the carpet as his parents snored. He trotted across the room and to the hall. As he quickly glanced in the direction of his bedroom door, terror in the worst form crashed into his heart and seized every muscle in his body. Urine flowed down his leg, leaving a black puddle on the dark carpet, and his bones chilled like blistering razor-sharp ice. There it was. His bedroom door was wide open. The heinous corpse floated as still as death, staring directly into his eyes from the blackness of his room. Its pus-colored eyes were barely visible in the dark, but they hit Julio like noxious spears. The horrid stain lay just beyond it, seething with a hellish energy and framing the demon's starved shoulders and mangled head. It didn't move. Nor did Julio. A short yelp jumped from Julio's lips. The sound barely impacted the rotting air as he swiftly covered his mouth with bitter hands. The creature reacted. Its head jerked and snapped as it flowed several inches closer, then stopped. It eyed the eggs and chicken innards upon the rug and below the doorframe. Its face twisted with nausea, and Julio noticed. Their sights reconnected. Julio struggled to keep still and quiet for what felt like hours as the ghost's siphoning eyes pulled every degree of heat from the boy's body. An eternity passed. Suddenly, a shout, then another shout, a bang. In the next unit, Cody began to cry softly in his room. His voice was clear and mournful. The creature hissed. Its attention was immediately torn from Julio as it curiously examined the wall from which the cries had emerged. Cody moaned loudly, then coughed. In a flash, the ghost vanished through the wall and into the next bedroom. "No!" Julio gasped. He ran into his room, jumped onto his bed, and desperately placed his hands on the drywall, terrified for his friend. A scream, an unearthly grunt, then running footsteps. The specter returned. Julio felt a deathly chill as the entity passed through the wall, through his body, and into the stain. The ghost was gone. Cody's panicked footsteps faded off towards the main hallway. Julio followed. He jumped from his mattress and raced through the stretch of his apartment. He unlocked his front door and jumped out into the muggy brightness. As Julio's eyes adjusted to the sudden light, he left his door ajar and approached Unit 146. The hot concrete was warm on his bare feet. "Cody!" he whispered loudly. No response. He pressed his ear against the door. The crying continued, but not from the unit. The voice echoed and reverberated. Julio curiously pulled his head away from the door. Cody's voice was coming from the stairwell. 6 doors down and past the fire hose cabinet, the frightened little boy was cowering in the bare corner with his knees pressed against his chin. His red hair was a mess, and his blue pajamas were wrinkled and unwashed. Compared to the stairwell, the hallway was a meat locker. The air was thick with moisture and despair. Julio descended the half-flight and joined Cody by his side. The child was overwrought with fright. His lips shook, and his eyes were frozen wide. Julio took his time, finding the right moment to speak.
"I've seen it every night since I was little," he whispered. He knew Cody had seen it. No questions were necessary. "Did it talk to you?" Julio asked.
"It talks?" Cody shouted. Panic struck him. Tears drained down his freckles and his breathing became unruly. Julio regretted the upset, but he had to know for sure. "If it talks to you, never say anything to it. No matter what, okay?" he warned. Cody's green eyes looked upon Julio in helpless terror. His teeth chattered.
"Why?"
he cried. A long moment passed as Julio looked to the floor. The story he was about to tell had never been told to anyone, not even his mother. The memory was painful to revisit, but necessary to recount. The words came out with a sour and putrid flavor.
"My dad didn't leave when I was little," he squeaked. The words pained him more than he had anticipated. He spoke slowly. "I remember him yelling, angry yelling at the wall. I was in my crib. I don't know where my mom was." He swallowed hard. "Then he started screaming and crying. I saw white eyes in the dark. Then he was gone."
"It took your dad?" Cody asked. His teeth gnashed.
"I think so," Julio whispered.
Cody wiped his nose. "Because he talked to it?" Julio shrugged. "I don't know." "Then how do you know it takes you if you talk?" Cody shrieked. "When I was 5, my mom got me a cat. A kitten," Julio began. "It cried all the time. It slept with me in my bed. The ghost came. It talked to me. I didn't say anything. My cat woke up and started crying again. The ghost took him by his paw. I heard a break, and my cat cried louder. It took her into the wall. I didn't see her again." Julio trembled. Cody's expression was a wild symphony of terrible emotions. His breaths were scattered and arbitrary. Julio spoke again. "I told my mom the cat ran away. She thinks my dad left too. Or she just says that to herself." Julio reached into the pocket of his PJs and pulled out the worn Zippo lighter. He longingly turned it over in his fingers. "This was my dad's," he said. Cody gently took it from his hand and inspected the engraving. "It says, 'You only find bravery in yourself when things become dark and frightening.'" "Something like that," Julio shrugged. "I keep it with me to remind me to not be scared." He took the Zippo. "Does it work?" Cody squeaked. "Sometimes," Julio replied. He pushed the lighter deep into his pocket. "We can't say anything to it, no matter what, Cody. The ghost will talk to you, but if you stay quiet, it will go away." The red-headed boy's eyes wandered, absorbing the information and the instructions. "Oh," he gasped lightly. "We need to stand up to it," Julio said, "just like the kid on the playground. But with the ghost, we need to say nothing, and it can't get us." Cody nodded. He was beginning to understand. "We need to be brave," Julio stated strongly. "Nobody will help us but us. We need to get mad and stop being scared." Julio's words were as much for himself as they were for Cody. A flicker of inspiration sparked between them. Cody steadied his shoulders and dried his face. A look of determination and pride hardened like stone across his expression. "I'm tired of being scared," he said. "I'm tired of being scared on the playground, at home and at school. I need to get mad," he repeated Julio's pep talk. Cody ground his teeth and dug his nails into his pajamas. "Good," Julio encouraged. Shattering the moment, the sound of a door slamming open and thunderous footsteps shook the building. An angry woman with a rat's nest hairdo and a mud-colored robe came to an infuriated halt at the entrance to the stairwell. She shook with fury. "Cody, what the hell are you doing out here at this time of night? Get your ass back in your damn room now!" Her voice exploded within the concrete percussion. Inspired by Julio's words, Cody jumped to his feet and misdirected his anger. His expression hardened. He pointed a strong finger in his mom's direction. "I'm not going to be afraid anymore, and you can't tell me what to do," he scolded.
Cody's 7-year-old voice yapped like a fearless chihuahua in the face of certain death.
Dios mío, Julio thought. He had just finished amping up his friend's nerve, but there was a time and a place for courageous insurrection. This situation was not applicable. Mom looked as though she had been slapped in the face with a cold fish. Her eyes narrowed. You will march up these steps and into your room, or I'm painting your ass red, you little shit, she roared.
Cody's demeanor did not change. Julio stood, reached over, and tugged on his friend's PJs in an attempt to shut him up. You're never touching me again, you. Mancha de mierda. Cody pronounced the curse flawlessly. It was the first time Julio had ever heard him repeat a single word in Spanish without an accent out of place, let alone an entire phrase. Julio slapped a hand against his forehead with mortification.
What did you just say to me? She gasped with outrage. She snapped her fingers and pointed at Julio. Hey, you brown kid, what did he just say? She barked. Cody's mom demanded an answer. Julio spat. Mancha de mierda means mother of mine, he lied. It's not anything bad, he assured her. It means he loves his mother and she loves him.
Mom just stood in place. Tired confusion danced across her eyes as she glared at the boys. Her voice calmed, but the anger was still thick. It's late, she said. Get to bed. She turned and thundered back to her unit, closing the door. Julio lightly slapped Cody in the back of the head. You shouldn't have done that, Cody. You almost got into serious trouble, he whined. Cody grinned widely. Desplumador! Did you see that? I stood up to her and she left, just like you said the ghost does. I'm going to do that all the time, he cheered. No, Julio barked. That's not smart to do with your parents. You have to do what your parents tell you. It's not the same. Thanks, Julio. I couldn't have done it without you. Cody hugged his friend tightly, completely ignoring his warnings and advice. Ugh, Julio grunted. He gave up the fight and impassively returned the hug, patting Cody on the back. Cody took a deep breath. His face went sour. He sniffed the air strangely and searched the stairwell. Why does it smell like pee in here? He asked. Julio's face went red with embarrassment. The boys returned to their separate units. The hour was late, and dead silence loomed over the building. Julio sat on the sofa in the dark living room and listened. If any kind of disturbance, argument, or beating took place in Cody's apartment, Julio would never forgive himself. Silence for 10 long minutes now. His eyes became heavy, and exhaustion settled in. He leaned his back against the cushions of Nick's spot and felt a warming shroud of comfort engulf him. Before he fell to sleep, the putrid scent of his wet pants jerked him back into a wakeful alertness. Julio slid off the sofa and headed for his room. Clean, dry pajamas would be in his dresser. He could change and finally sleep in his own bed. The beast had never returned twice in one night, and Julio wasn't looking forward to his cramped, overheated crevasse between Nick and Mama. Just as Julio passed the bathroom and rounded the corner to his room, there it was again. He froze. This time, the wretched phantom seemed disinterested in Julio. It hung menacingly, 4 feet from the carpet, and stared at the wall against Julio's bed as if contemplating or waiting. It didn't even seem to notice he was there. His pep talk to Cody about being brave resounded in his head. Julio knew he couldn't speak, but the ghost didn't seem to react to movement. An hour prior, Cody had jumped out of his bed and ran from it, and all the demon had done was retreat. Julio took a step closer. It didn't budge. He crept towards the open door and noticed the eggs, innards, and chicken feet. Why had it looked upon them with disgust? Julio thought. Was there some kind of truth behind Mom's paranormal toolbox? His thoughts churned. He had to know. Julio slowly kneeled. He took 1 brown egg from the wooden bowl and held it between his thumb and forefinger. He held it outward, making it as visible as possible. The creature was still fixated on the wall to Cody's room. He took a step towards the room, then another. As soon as the egg passed the threshold, the ghost's head jerked,
and its eyes met Julio's. It grunted and hissed as the egg neared. Its neck snapped with agitation, and its body vibrated and seized. A rush of courage swelled in Julio. After years of torment and oppression by the beast, he finally felt a sense of control, a sense of reprisal, a sense of power. Julio's expression narrowed as he looked upon the ghost. The pent-up fury of 1,000 sleepless nights roasted in his indignant stare and fearless heart. Julio stepped over the boundary and snatched 2 more eggs as he passed into the room. The demon drew backward as the furious boy and his arsenal of poultry neared. It was cornered like an agitated cat as it spat, growled, and hissed. Just for a second, Julio wondered what the entity would do if he spoke to the ghost in its current state of restraint. He discarded the idea. Discovering what the specter was afraid of was one small step towards ridding himself of it completely. He didn't allow the high of one victory lead him into making a deadly error. Unexpectedly, voices erupted in the bedroom behind the wall. Julio stood before the spirit holding his eggs, as Cody and his mother shared an uproarious confrontation. Cries, curses, and physical violence shook the building as Cody's bedroom door was slammed shut, and the boy's pain-induced sobs reverberated from the next unit. Over the course of an entire minute, the sobs eased into familiar and silent whimpers. The creature twitched, rose, made a wide circle around Julio, and vanished into Cody's room. "No!" Julio cried. He dropped the eggs onto the carpet and jumped onto his bed. "Don't talk to it, Cody!" he shouted. Silence. "Don't talk to it. Don't talk to it. Don't talk to it," he repeated again and again in tearful whispers. Julio listened intensely as his friend's voice became more prevalent. No words, just fearful, audible moans. He could hear the ghost as well. Its horrible words were too quiet to make out, but Julio was all too familiar with the monster's string of questions. After Julio counted 5 times, the creature had spoken. The squeak of a mattress met his ears. Cody is standing up, Julio morbidly thought. His heart raced with panic. In the same manner Cody had bravely confronted his mother earlier that night, he rose to his feet, gathered his nerve, and spoke without hindrance. "Leave me alone, you ugly shit stain! Desplumador!" The little red-headed boy's words resounded perfectly through the boundary. Julio slapped the wall as tears streamed and his voice cracked. "Cody! No!" A nightmarish howl struck the building's foundation like an earthquake, and Cody's screams sent a helpless chill through Julio's body. In a span of just under a second, the ghost passed directly through the wall and straight through Julio. It dragged Cody by his bare foot and blue pajamas as the boy cried out like an infant in the cold grip of agony and apathetic death. In the brief tick of a single moment, Julio met eyes with his friend. Before he had a chance to connect thought with sight, the wraith disappeared, along with Cody, through the wall and into the stain. Silence again. Julio was left a quivering heap upon his floor, retching and heaving with anguish. Mama and Nicholas rushed into the room. Julio's bedroom light was illuminated as his mother dropped to her knees. She embraced her son, spouting prayers and comforting words that fell deaf. Julio's bloodshot eyes rose to the stain as it retreated into the wall like hot tar down a rust-covered floor drain. All at once, the blemish was gone. In the following years, the dark mark never appeared for Julio again, nor the specter or any sign that they had ever existed. As Julio grew, a dark vengeance grew with him. A vengeance that pulsed and boiled with a dark detestment, just like the blemish itself. It drove him, pushed him, and formed him. He interpreted the glance he had shared with Cody just before his disappearance as a solemn promise. A promise to one day find his friend, find his father, and put an end to the ghost that comes out of the stain forever. El Paso, Texas. Evan stared at the ceiling. It had been over 30 minutes since he had heard even a whisper from the strange man. The boy wondered if he was still seated in the corner. The darkness made it hard to tell. The time that had passed began hazing his memory of the visitor and the short conversation they had shared. Evan wondered if the man had been a dream. He desperately hoped not. He sighed and grew impatient. "Hello?" he whispered. Silence. "Are you still there?" Nothing. Slowly and carefully, Evan sat up. With the same deathly hiss as it had for several months, the twisted wretch emerged from the portal. Evan collapsed onto his mattress and covered his face. The phantom floated like a dying birthday balloon and drifted toward Evan's pillow. Evan shook and cowered as the creature jerked and clicked above his comforter. Beneath the linens, Evan prayed the man hadn't been a dream. He prayed hard and begged for it all to be real in the silence of his mind. With a quick spark of faith, Evan decided to follow the man's instructions all the same. Real or not, dream or no dream. Before the spirit could speak, Evan threw off the blanket and popped up from under his sheet. Quickly, he spat the words, "I can see you." The monster's white eyes widened and an otherworldly grin crept across its mangled face. No man, no voice. Evan panicked. He drew his back against the wall as the ghost brought its rotten gaze inches from Evan's cheek. Regret congealed in Evan's veins as the ghost roared with a monstrous fury and grabbed him by his trembling arm. Its frozen grip was painful, and Evan could feel his very life draining through his flesh and into the monster's embrace. The helpless boy shut his eyes tightly and waited for the worst. From behind the ghost and out of the darkness, a strong arm seized the demon's throat and squeezed. The echo of snapping flesh and cracking bones added to the creature's gags and choking gasps. Evan was released. The pain ceased. The flick of a Zippo lighter cast a warm glow onto the ghost, and onto the visitor holding it captive. "¿Me recuerdas? Maldito hijo de puta!" The man growled as he shook the helpless monster in his fist. The sleeve of his jacket was rolled up, and a thick coat of olive oil and fresh basil flakes dripped from his fingers all the way to his elbow. Evan gasped with desperate relief. The man turned a kind eye in his direction. "Gracias, Evan. I wouldn't have been able to trap your little friend here without it first grabbing onto you. I appreciate your bravery, and I apologize for the language. My stepfather cursed like a sailor. I still haven't shaken the habit." He held the lighter close to the ghost's horrible face. Evan shuddered as its terrible details were made clear in the flickering light. "Take a good look at your friend, Evan. You won't be seeing him again," he said with confidence. Evan's young body rushed with a mixture of emotions and adrenaline he couldn't handle. "Never?" Evan asked. He trembled with excitement. "Never," the man spoke. "And I'm afraid you won't be seeing me again either," he said softly. Evan's face flattened with a hint of disappointment. "Because seeing me means you are in trouble," he added. "What if another ghost comes?" The boy's voice shook. The vigilante snapped the lighter closed and tossed it onto the bed before Evan. "You'll have that," he said. "It gives you power, makes you brave." Evan grabbed the antique and held it close to his chest. The man winked. "Use it for good and not evil," he warned with a smile. The demon jerked and attempted to free itself. The intruder tightened his grip and shook it again. "No te muevas o te parto la cabeza, pendejo," he barked. The man took one last look at Evan's thankful face. "I left $20 on the fridge. That should cover the sandwich." He glanced at the quilt on the floor and pointed around Evan's bedroom. "And tell your mom to hang her ugly blanket someplace else. It doesn't match the colors in here. You can keep the chair." He turned on his heel, faced the black portal, and whispered to the ghost, "Ahora, llévame a donde llevaste el resto de ellos." In a quick flash, the spirit took Julio off of his feet, into the air, through the wall, and into the stain. blue sparks and violet arcs reflected in Evan's eyes as he beheld the spectacle. The flashes doused and the stain faded, leaving behind a bare wall and a clean coat of paint. The man and the ghost were gone, as was the boy's fear. Evan collapsed onto his back and onto his pillow. His body tingled with inspiration and wild admiration. He would never forget the brave man with the funny accent who saved him from his ghost. And he would go on forever with a selfless drive to help others as the man did for him. Evan smiled as he looked upon the strange inscription on the magic lighter. "Zorro," he whispered. This was a reading of The Visitor, a haunting yarn of insomnia. Copyright 2025, Mark Stephen Nordlund. All rights reserved. A Boohouse Books book. BoohouseBooks.com.